The state governor, returning from an important meeting, became a victim of brutal racism when a police officer decided that his suit was nothing but a disguise for a criminal. But what happened next will change everything. You won't believe what happened next, but let's start from the very beginning. James, the state governor, stood at the door of the building where the most crucial meeting of his political career had just concluded. He was tired, but satisfied. Many of the issues discussed revolved around improving the lives of Black communities, education, healthcare, housing programs. He felt that he was doing something important, that these changes could be a turning point for an entire generation. Walking through this neighborhood, always filled with people, was part of his daily reality, even though it wasn't the wealthiest part of the city. The man wore an expensive light-colored suit, not too flashy, but impeccably tailored, with a neat tie and clean leather shoes. For most of the locals, of course, such things were out of reach. However, James wasn't the type of person who was ashamed of his successful career. He knew that his image might be distorted, but every time he appeared in public, his suit, his confidence, and his approach to business proved that he wasn't there by accident. Still, he could feel the eyes of people who had no idea who he really was. Suddenly, he noticed a group of police officers standing near a patrol car, talking amongst themselves, clearly evaluating passers-by. James, whose instincts had sharpened over the years, observed their actions. They were clearly looking for a reason to stop someone. There was something off about their looks, cold, suspicious, distant. As he approached, one of the officers abruptly stepped toward him. He was a middle-aged man with a rough face, a slouched hat, and an aggressive expression. "Hey you, stop!" he said, halting him with a gesture. James froze, and his instincts kicked in. In such situations, there were always two paths. Either escalate into conflict or stay calm and try to resolve it peacefully. But this time, judging by the officer's tone, he had already decided that James needed to be dealt with. "Who are you?" the officer asked, eyeing James from head to toe. "You clearly don't belong here. Seriously, why are you walking around in a suit like that on these streets?" he added mockingly. James, trying not to show his concern, replied calmly, "I'm the governor of this state. Why did you stop me?" The officer didn't believe him. He scoffed skeptically and took a step closer, as though it were some absurd performance. "Governor, huh? Do you see who you're talking to?" he continued, clearly thinking James was just trying to talk his way out of a potential fine or trouble. His voice became even more mocking. "What? Are you out of your mind? A guy like you can't be the governor. Where are your papers?" James felt irritation rising within him. It was so familiar, but it always stirred the same painful emotions. He knew this wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a product of the system. Stereotypes and biases that they didn't even realize they carried. At that moment, James thought about how many of his Black colleagues and friends had to face such treatment. "I need my ID," he said, but the officer interrupted him. "Don't make me laugh. You know what I think. You're not from this world. So come on, show me who you really are." Anyone listening to James would surely understand how cruel this game was with his dignity. James was a smart, successful man, with years of experience, but to this officer, his status was impossible. He stood before him not as an equal, but as someone to be ignored, humiliated, checked, doubted. In response, James simply sighed and imagined himself in this spot years ago, when he was younger. Back then, he might have been confused, scared. But now, as governor, he knew his words could change the situation. "Listen," he said, trying to remain calm. "I'm happy to show you all the necessary documents, but before you start checking me, you need to understand that these actions are not just an inconvenience for me. This isn't just a mistake. This is systemic dismissal of who I am." But the officer was unwavering. He had already made up his mind, and nothing would change it. While James tried to calm the situation, it continued to escalate. He could feel his patience starting to wear thin. The officer went back to his car, grabbed the hose usually used to water the curbs and intersections, and approached James. "You think you can walk around in suits like you're someone special? We'll show you who's in charge here." he said, turning the water on. James stood there, watching with pain and confusion. He knew this wasn't just harsh treatment of black people. It was a test he had to pass. Every step he took, every moment of resistance, pressed on his inner world. At that moment, James realized that the officer didn't know who he was dealing with. But the humiliation wasn't just personal. It was a symbol of how black people were placed at the bottom of the social hierarchy, despite all achievements, despite recognition. Sometimes, just one glance is enough to decide that you're not worthy of respect. And in that moment, James felt the water running over his suit, becoming more than just a physical assault. It was a gesture that attacked the very foundation of his dignity. Silently, watching the water stream down his suit, James felt the internal tension building. But instead of backing down, he gathered all his strength and determination. He knew that if he didn't show his resilience now, this moment would be replayed endlessly. Not just for him, but for thousands of others who had experienced and would experience the same thing. "You're wrong," James said, looking the officer straight in the eye. "I'm not just a person you can humiliate. I'm a symbol of change, and that change will not let you continue this behavior." With every word, his confidence grew stronger. There was no fear in his voice, but the officer continued to spray water, unable to believe his ears. "Are you crazy? Do you even understand who you are?" But James knew this wasn't just about physical strength or water pressure. He was standing against the system, standing against all those biased stereotypes and ideas that had existed for centuries. This was his moment of strength, a moment that proved that the dignity of a black person could never be questioned. At that moment, when the officer was about to douse James again, someone from the crowd, which had gathered around, shouted, "Hey, he's the governor!" People began to actively discuss what was happening. That shout became the spark for others to intervene. Gradually, the situation started to turn around. Another officer, who recognized James, confirmed his identity. The first officer, initially stunned, began to retreat. James stood among the confused crowd, but there was neither shame nor anger in his eyes. He realized that this incident was not just his trial. It was a signal to everyone that the fight for justice, for equality, wasn't just words. It was something that could and should be done every day,